I'm going to move on to talk about ancient Egypt. We haven't quite finished it yet. We're almost done, I think, pretty much with Egypt. We've got a few more things to go into, which I'll talk about. And so I think the last things that we need to talk about is we need to kind of finish up and discuss the New Kingdom. Most just kind of go into and talk about some of the pharaohs, mostly in the 18th and 19th dynasty. So that's mostly what I'm going to, of course, do. And then from there, I'm going to move on to talk about the Persian Empire. Kind of just talk about the rise of it right now, because I'll get to more stuff about that later, about the Persians. And then I should have time to cover a little bit on the Phoenicians as well. So anyway, from last time, I had talked about, I think the last thing I did, so I started talking about some of the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, like Hatshepsut. I think that was the last one I did. I haven't got to some of the other ones I'll get to that are kind of famous as well. Let me talk about also one that's well known. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but his name is Akhenaten, who was known as Amenhotep IV, is what they called him. Amenhotep IV. Amenhotep, or Akhenaten, was this radical pharaoh. You can see they called him a nickname. He was sometimes called the heretic, because a lot of people kind of didn't like him because he went against their traditional religions in ancient Egypt. And in fact, the Egyptians were so mad about this guy, they struck him from the record of Egyptian pharaohs from that actual dynasty. So they hated him that much. And he lived in the 1300s BC. And I think he was like the 10th pharaoh, I believe, of the 18th dynasty. What happened was he was infamous for creating this monotheistic cult, which was based on a god called the Aten, which was known as the so-called sun disk god, they called it. And the sun disk god was like a type of solar deity that was kind of not as well known in Egypt, kind of similar to Ra, but just a lot of people didn't really worship it much. And so he took this god and he created a new religion, new cult out of it that was, supposed to be like real powerful, and he changed his name. So he went from being, Amenhotep IV, which was his name, to becoming Akhenaten. And if you want to know, Akhenaten meant the living spirit of the Aten. That's the translation, supposedly from hieroglyphs. And then he went on, and what happened was he founded his own cult center. Like he closed down the temple of Karnak, banned all the other gods, and he moved his capital to this place called Akhetaten, which is kind of like in the middle of Egypt, like halfway between Cairo and Luxor. That became his cult center, like his death and all that. However, the cult center, it didn't flourish after his death. So after he died, it kind of collapsed after that. And so the Egyptians kind of went away from the actual religion, this monotheistic religion that he kind of created. It wasn't really a true monotheistic religion. Supposedly it was a deal where he would worship the god and then they would worship him. So the pharaoh is still kind of seen as a living god, like most pharaohs were overall. He's also known, he's known for, like, you see pictures of him, he's known for being like really ugly and grotesque looking. And his wife, of course, which is Queen Nefertiti, was believed to be very beautiful. That was his main wife and queen. She is considered to be one of the most beautiful queens of ancient Egypt. And they have found actual statues of her, which kind of do seem to kind of imply that she was right there. There's pictures of her. Those are actually pictures. Those are actually statues that they found at like a workshop that was apparently buried there at Akhetaten. And her name means supposedly the beautiful one has come. And they believe that she may have been a brief pharaoh for just a few years, like 3 to 4 years, sometime in the late 14th century. And then after her death, they believe that King Tut came in. He became the next pharaoh. And she may have been like part of the cult too. I think they seem to think that she was part of the Aten cult. Maybe have kept it going a little bit after he died. But after her death too, it pretty much, like I said, collapsed overall. Then you had, of course, the other pharaoh that's, of course, very well known, of course, today in modern times. And that, of course, is Akhenaten. Excuse me, not Akhenaten, King Tut, or Tutankhamon, I meant. So King Tut comes in, and King Tut reigned, it's one of the last major pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. They actually had two pharaohs that reigned after he died, which were named and Horemheb, who were ministers under him. But Tut was actually the, I think, last direct descendant, I want to say, of the 18th dynasty. King Tutankhamon, and he's not known for much, like during his reign. If you study about King Tut, predominantly when he was a kid, like a young kid, like a young child or whatever, he basically was mostly known for his ministers restoring a lot of Egypt after, Akhenaten had wrecked it. So pretty much all the old cults, like the Amen cult at Karnak, at Thebes, was all restored by him. And later he had a nickname. He was called the Boy King. That's what they called King Tut, because of the fact that he had such a short reign, mostly in his youth, from around the age of 9 to about the age of 18. So he may not have even have reigned 10 years. So he was not around very, very long as a ruler. He's one of the very few pharaohs that have a nickname, like, King Tut. I guess that would be Akhenaten, his father, they think, as far as they know. His death is a mystery. There's theories about what killed him. Of course, some think it was from natural causes like illnesses, which they think he may have suffered from different things like epilepsy. They think he may have broken a leg or had some kind of accident where he broke a bone, either in his leg. And also they think may have had a fracture in the back of his skull, they think. And some speculate that he could have been murdered, which is the other theory, maybe how he died. He also had a club foot. So, all these kind of problems he had health-wise, they think. And they think a lot of this is from all the inbreeding that was kind of going on in the Egyptian royal families. So, yeah, his death is kind of a mystery. They're not sure if that's really true or not about his death and all that. Now, his tomb itself is very famous. That's what's so famous about King Tut. He's more famous for being dead in his tomb than really when he was alive. And his tomb was discovered in November of 1922. It's, of course, the last tomb ever found in the Valley of the Kings. It's called often KV62. And it was found by the British archaeologist, which is Howard Carter, who I do have a picture of Carter, which is right here. So here's the guy that found it. And Carter was involved in a number of excavations in Egypt to find one of the last major pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. One of the men that, of course, helped back his excavations. It's pretty much paid by this guy. It was financed by this guy named, he goes by different names, Lord Carnarvon or the Earl of Carnarvon, who is also known as George Herbert. And he was like fascinated with Egypt. And so he hired Howard Carter, who was getting pretty famous at that time in Egypt for his archaeological digs. And so his tomb was pretty important, King Tut, because it's the only major tomb that was ever found intact in the Valley of the Kings. All the other tombs, were robbed at one point. So I think they later found like some of the mummies that were kind of hidden away. But pretty much all the treasure and everything else that was with King Tut's tomb was pretty much, all robbed except his. The chamber, by the way, was like his tomb was really small. So only like a few chambers in it. You can see kind of in that picture. But of course, the most famous thing they found, with King Tut's tomb was, of course, the mummy, still in there, with its famous death mask. And I've actually seen the death mask myself. It's pretty amazing. It's mostly made of solid gold, and it's considered one of the most priceless artifacts ever found in ancient Egypt. But there's a story where I think that beard fell off or something. They recently had a problem with that, I know. But I think hopefully they glued it back on, that kind of deal. Here's some pictures also. That's his wife. His wife was Queen Akhenamun, who I think was, I want to say, one of Nefertiti's daughters he married. They didn't have any children. Well, they had 2 children, but they died. They didn't have any surviving children, and so the throne then went to some advisors or ministers his that took over afterwards. That's one of his golden coffins or sarcophagus that they put the mummy in of King Tut. It's mostly made of wood and gold. You can see, I think each one weighed something like 200 pounds, which is ridiculous. So you can see all these kings were very wealthy, and so it's believed that all these kings of Egypt probably had death masks like this at one point. But I guess they're all stolen and probably melted down, all that. So that's the story of King Tut. There is one more story about King Tut I will mention about, which, of course, is well known about, of course, the story of his tomb and all that. Supposedly, there was a legend that came about afterwards, which you may have heard of, that was called the Curse of the Mummy or the Curse of the Pharaoh. And supposedly there was a belief that the tomb was cursed by the Egyptians, spells put on it or whatever. And so after people went into the tomb after it was opened, I think in 1923, numerous people died mysteriously, including, by the way, Lord Carnarvon, the guy that was the benefactor of Howard Carter's digs. He died and a bunch of other people died. And so a lot of people, like newspapers and so on, started saying that there was a curse on the tomb, curse of the mummy. And so it was a kind of a sensation because, the finding of King Tut's tomb was one of the most famous discoveries in the 20th century. It was very, very famous. And of course, Hollywood spawned a bunch of movies, of course, about it, which, of course, the most famous was the Mummy movies, which started actually in the 1930s. I think they started making these. And of course, they've made more modern ones too, of course, later. So but that's King Tut's tomb and all that, which, like I said, was a sensation. It was found. All right, let me also talk about one more pharaoh a little bit as well, which, of course, is Ramses the Great. Ramses the Great is likely to be one of the greatest pharaohs of the New Kingdom. He was a 19th dynasty pharaoh, really the peak ruler of the whole New Kingdom, because under him, the New Kingdom peaked in size. It went all the way from Sudan and Egypt and Libya, all the way through Israel up into Syria. So it was a massive empire that stretched at one point into part of Southwest Asia. And I think he was the 3rd pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, which I told you that dynasty was called the Ramessids. Anyway, he's considered to be one of the longest reigning pharaohs in Egyptian history. They think he reigned 66 or 67 years, roughly, from a teenager all the way up to I want to say close to 80, 90 years old. There used to be a whole story that he was 100 almost when he died, but they don't think that's really true about that. So he was one of the longest reigning overall in Egyptian history. Also, they talk about the fact that he was this pharaoh that could have been the Exodus pharaoh, the one that challenged Moses and tried to stop Moses and the Israelites from leaving Egypt. They're not sure if that's really connected or not. It all depends on when Moses lived. Moses lived in the 13th century. It's quite possible it could have been, but they're not sure. Of course, there's numerous pharaohs named Ramses. They had about 11 of them. So it could have been any of those Ramses. But the Bible does not say the pharaoh's name. So that's still kind of a mystery. And so that's just unprovable, more or less. He did have nicknames. Some people called him the Great Ancestor. So he was one of those pharaohs that was called the Great, rulers that was called the Great in ancient times. The Greeks also called him Ozymandias. That was his Greek name that he was known by. And it was also a famous poem. You may have heard of by Percy Shelley that's called that, which is basically about Ramses the Great. It's very short. If you want to read it, look it up. But it's about that, basically. Later, Ramses was mostly known as the thing that I guess you can see his mummy on the right there, that's about it from his, I guess, reign that's left over and all his riches. But he was mostly known for his building projects. The main things he was known for building is he's the one that helped complete the Temple of Karnak. I'll show you this in this slide here, but he was the one that completed the hypostyle hall, which was the largest part of the Temple of Karnak. You'll see that in the little documentary that I'm giving you to watch later. And he helped finish it. I think he and his father finished it. He was Seti the First. They built it together, and that became like the cult center of the Amun cult, which I told you was the state god, of Egypt. He was also known for this other temple there's actually several of these down here in southern Egypt, but he built what is called the Temple of Ramses the Great at Abu Simbel, which is right on Lake Nasser, like above Sudan. And they consider that to be one of his most impressive temples he ever built. It's famous for its 2 pairs of statues of Ramses the Great. If you wonder if Ramses is kind of like this egotistical ruler who loves to build big statues of himself, it's true. He did. He was egotistical. He wanted to show his power off. I don't think too many other pharaohs had done that much before. And so he was kind of known for that. Each statue, by the way, was about 69 feet tall, each, all 4 of them. Of course, one of them fell down, you can see right in front. They'll talk about that in the little documentary, but if you know much about that temple, it was later moved because they were building the Aswan High Dam in Egypt back in the 20th century. So they had to cut it out and move it. And it's known for being a rock cut temple. It was cut out, part of, like, I guess, a mountain. And it's got statues that are almost that big inside too, which is pretty impressive. So it's definitely one of his most impressive temples that he constructed, Ramses the Great. There's like inside, there's like a little pillar in there, but that they cut out. But that's actually his wife right there. That was his main wife and queen, Nefertari. But Ramses was known for having numerous women, like lots of wives, lots of concubines, and it's believed that he had over 100 children, like 50 sons and 50-something daughters, and all that. And he actually outlived them all. He outlived all his sons. He outlived all his grandsons. So no wonder they call him the Great Ancestor. Also, they got this other temple that he built too, which is called the Ramesseum. The Ramesseum is a temple that was built. It was this mortuary temple that was constructed in Western Thebes. It's where it basically brought his body to be mummified. And also the temple was also built to honor the god Osiris, which was one of the gods of the dead. And it was actually, the name itself was actually coined by Jean-Francois Champollion, the same guy that figured out how to translate the Rosetta Stone. He coined the name Ramesseum. And the site is also known for this massive statue of Ramses the Great, which is called the colossal statue of Ramses the Great. Forget how tall it is, but it's like, I don't know, 40 feet tall, maybe more. Not exactly how big it is. But it was actually at the site, but it collapsed. And that might be what Percy Shelley's kind of talking about. Everything's ruined and all that, and not much left all over the place of his I guess, once empire, Ramses. Now, after the New Kingdom collapsed, which will be, I guess the New Kingdom ends at the close to about the 11th century BC, the beginning of the Iron Age. Egypt declined in what they call the post-empire period. Starts around the 11th century and goes down to like Roman times. And Egypt never really recovered. They just weren't as powerful as other states in the Iron Age. And so what happened was Egypt ended up being the state that was occupied by other people, like the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Ottoman Empire, and so on. This is pretty much that way, even up to modern times, up to like the 19th, 20th century. Egypt was occupied by foreign powers. Even Britain at one point kind of had a lot of power in Egypt until like the 20th century and all that. So Egypt really doesn't become a modern state again like it is now, like a separate state until I think right after around World War II or so, right after I believe it was. So that's history of Egypt. Pretty much, I think this is going to be where your first exam is going to actually stop right here. So that'll be about the 27-minute mark. All right. So anyway, I'm going to move on next, and I'm going to talk about, of course, some other topics today I want to get into as well. And I'm going to also talk about next first, I'm going to go ahead and review. I guess we'll do that first. I'll go ahead and review a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and start talking about the Persian Empire. And if I have any time, I'll talk about the Phoenicians if I do have time or not. We'll see how that goes. Now, some study guide questions here, of course, to review for you for, of course, your upcoming your first exam, excuse me. Which king built the first true pyramids? Of course, that was King Sneferu, who was the father of Khufu. He built two pyramids, which, of course, were the bent and the red pyramid. So both those were pyramids that he constructed. What is unique about these two pyramids? Well, the bent pyramid was the first smooth-sided pyramid ever built, and it was, of course, heavily known for being built with two different separate slopes, like degree slopes of the actual pyramid. So it gave kind of a bent shape, which I think on the bottom was 54 degrees and the top was 43 degrees. And the red pyramid was the first successful smooth-sided pyramid ever constructed, and that was the one that was his tomb, the tomb of Sneferu, that he was buried in. It's also called the Bat Pyramid. And both those pyramids, the bent and red, were built at a place called Dashur, which is in like kind of south of Cairo. Who built the Great Pyramid of Giza? Of course, that was, of course, King Khufu, who they also call Cheops, the Greek name. And the Great Pyramid constructed near Cairo, the Giza complex, is the largest pyramid ever built in ancient Egypt. Of course, one of the seven wonders of the world, the only one that survives, was built to a height of 480 feet, and the width on each side is about 756 feet each. So it's about 13 acres. It's got about 2.3 million stone blocks in it, which is ridiculous. They think the pyramids were constructed using human labor. So physical labor. They didn't have draft animals. And of course, the main theory on how the pyramids were mostly constructed was with using some kind of mud brick ramping system, which is evident, by the way, at the Temple of Karnak. I actually have evidence of them doing it. I think the only problem is like what happened to the ramps, and all that. So wasn't aliens and all that, I don't think. As far as I know people like to say that, but well, anyway. What two other pyramids were also built at Giza, major ones? They have the Pyramid of Khafre. It's about 470 feet tall, and it was the second largest ever built in Egypt. Red Pyramid is third largest, by the way. And then the third Giza pyramid is the Pyramid of Mycarinos or Minkari. And that one's only like about 215 feet tall. It's like short, not that big. What was the Great Sphinx? Who possibly built it? The Great Sphinx was a type of royal statue that was built the Giza complex right in front of the Pyramid of Khafre. They think it was built by Khafre to honor his father, King Khufu or Cheops. It's a royal statue, which of course has the head of a lion and the body of the man. They think it symbolized the king's power. So it's a very mysterious statue, which has been there for years. Also, let's see. What was Egyptian hieroglyphs? I told you that was the Greek nickname for what they call the language systems of Egypt, which there's different versions of it. Hieroglyphs comes from two words: hiero, meaning sacred or priestly, and glyph, meaning carving or writing. There were some cursive forms of Egyptian writing. They had hieratic and they had demotic. Those are the two most famous. They also had Coptic, which was a Greek form of hieroglyphs. Why was the discovery of Rosetta Stone important? When was it discovered? Of course, the Rosetta Stone was found by Napoleon's troops. I think a guy I told you named Pierre Bouchard, a soldier. And the stone was important because it led to the deciphering of hieroglyphs, which was a dead language. And it was actually a stone that was an inscription from the Ptolemaic dynasty, King Ptolemy V. The guy that translated it, of course, I mentioned him earlier today, Jean-Francois Champollion. He's the one who figured it out around 1822. He's also one of the first to go to Egypt to start reading stuff like hieroglyphs. When the Hyksos invasion of Egypt occurred, they believe it occurred in the time of the Second Intermediate Period, which happened between the Middle and New Kingdoms. They think maybe about the 17th century. Who were the Hyksos? They believe they were a type of Asiatic Semitic peoples that came out of Canaan, which is basically where Israel, Lebanon is. They brought in like composite bow and the war chariot, and it allowed them to conquer part of Egypt. What did Hyksos mean in Greek? There's different translations, but one translation is foreign lands, or really rulers of foreign lands, or foreign kings. There's all kinds of translations. I don't know if they know which one's the real correct one. They say it's either pronounced Hyksos or Hyksos. One of the two is usually popular. After the Hyksos were driven out, what dynasty was begun by King Ahmose, who started the New Kingdom? That was, of course, the 18th dynasty, which Ahmose started. He was the first pharaoh of it. That dynasty would go on to have three dynasties: the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th dynasties. What was the Valley of the Kings? Where was it built in Egypt? The Valley of the Kings was a New Kingdom necropolis site where they built rock-cut tombs, like into the bedrock of a mountain. And the pharaohs were buried there secretly to prevent tomb robbing, but it failed. It's located in western Thebes, across from where Luxor is. So it's in the upper part of Egypt, or upper valley part of Egypt. What was the religious capital of the New Kingdom, especially for the cult of Amun? That, of course, was Thebes. Thebes, and of course at Thebes you had the Karnak temple complex, of course, which is now, of course, part of modern Luxor. That's the modern name that they call Thebes now. Who was Queen Hatshepsut? What was she famous for? Queen Hatshepsut was, of course, a female pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. She was the daughter of Tutmosis I, and she's considered to be one of the greatest female pharaohs of Egypt, which there was only like maybe three major ones that were famous. She was known for her building projects and also for being a golden age of Egypt. She even traded with eastern part of Africa, like in Somalia, like the land of Punt. I don't think we need to do the rest. We just did that. So Akhenaten, of course, was the one that started the Aten cult, which we just talked about. We talked about his wife, Nefertiti. We talked about King Tut, the boy king, found by Howard Carter. And then we talked about Ramses the Great, really the last great pharaoh, and one of the greatest pharaohs, of course, like I said, of the New Kingdom, who ruled part of the 19th dynasty. So I think all that we've kind of done already, which I'll go ahead and move on. So let me go ahead and talk next about the Persian Empire, a few minutes today, of course, on that. Let me blow this up for you. Yeah, Persian Empire developed in what we call modern Iran, which, by the way, um, it's still called Persia. That's what they call it today, of course. In the West, they use the more anglicized name. And the Persian Empire developed in the 6th century BC. So that'd be like 2,500 something years ago when they first developed. And the Greeks gave it a name. They called it the Achaemenid Empire. That's what they usually called it. And it was around from the 6th century, about mid 6th century BC. And it goes down to near the end of the 4th century BC. So maybe 559 to 330 BC might be about where it was originally. So it was around like 2.5 centuries or so. There have been multiple Persian empires. They have like the Parthian Empire, the Sassanid Empire, which you may have heard of as well. And we get more, of course, into the meat of the Persian Empire. Now, the Persian Empire, ancient Iran was made up of different populated peoples, mostly what they call Aryan peoples, which would be basically like types of Caucasian peoples that settled there thousands of years ago. The proper term for people in Iran, by the way, is not really Indo-Aryan. It's actually Indo-Iranian, so they actually call it. But basically the same thing, Indo-Aryan or Aryan peoples. And it's believed that these were peoples that originated from somewhere close to where southern Russia is. That's about where they think the Aryans started, or Caucasian people started, somewhere around there. Either the Caspian Sea is to the east or the Black Sea to the west, anywhere from the Caucasus Mountains to where Turkestan used to be. I think it's now broke up. And so Iran or Persia was a name that meant actually the land of the Aryans. That's actually what it means. And the Iranian peoples were made up of different types of tribes or peoples that populated ancient Iran or Persia. Those are the main two that would dominate early on. In the north, close to where the Caspian Sea is, you had the so-called Medes, and they ruled a kingdom that was called the Kingdom of Media, which went back to, I think, the Bronze Age and all that, I guess. And then you had the Persians, of course, or Persia, which was in southern part of Iran. They were more closer to the Persian Gulf, hence the name, of course, being used. And they had some other ones there too, like throughout, Iran, they had other groups that were famous, like the Scythians were big, the Bactrians, you may have heard of them, Bactria and Scythia. They were also well known as well. I do have a map showing you like Iran itself, which Iran is located here where it says Persia. Mostly the Medes were right here. The Persians were down here. The Scythians were up here close to where Armenia is. And the Bactrians were over here. So they're kind of all over the place. There's more than those tribes that were part of ancient Iran, but those are the main ones. And what they think over time was that this state formed into an empire from these multiple groups, because most empires are like a multi-ethnic empire that usually forms. So kind of showing you a map there, right there. Now, I need to talk about, of course, one of their first rulers that's important that starts the actual Achaemenid or Persian Empire. His name, of course, is Cyrus the Great. Sometimes they call him Cyrus the Persian or Cyrus the Second, I think actually his name was, because he was like more than one with that name. And they think he founded the Persian Empire close to 559 BC. So 559 BC is about right. And I'll put it on the screen if you want to see this later. They think, consolidated the empire from mostly two states early on. He was, of course, a king that was ruling over Persia in the southern part of Iran. And then he basically forced the kingdom of Media, the Medes, to form into one state with his. And they believe that Cyrus was related to both sides. On his father's side, he was a Persian, and on his mother's side, he was related to the Medes. So he had like the lineage to basically rule over both states. And so both states were basically combined as one state. Over time, he would expand this empire. He would keep expanding it and all that, basically pushing east and west. And you can see all those areas you see there from Iran. He conquered all of Iran first. Then he conquered part of Turkey. Then he conquered Mesopotamia. And then I think some of his forces may have pushed even further east of Iran also as well. Later, his empire keeps growing, and it pushes all the way to India, where the Indus River Basin is. That was its eastern border. And to the west, it reached all the way to like Egypt and Libya. And then even some later rulers even tried to push into Europe by trying to take over part of Greece, which I'll get to later, which occurs around the 5th century BC. He did found one of their first capitals, which is true, which is called Pasargadae. That was the original capital of the empire. Yeah, he found the original capital, but later the capital of the Persian Empire moved to another site in southern Iran, which was called Persepolis, the city of Persia, which is what I guess the Greeks called it later, and that was founded by King Darius the Great, who would rule later as a ruler. Like I said, Cyrus, conquered most of the Persian Empire, a good chunk of it, and his successors came and just expanded even more. The peak of the Persian Empire was really between the 6th and 5th centuries. Then in the 4th century, it began to decline, which I'll get to later about that. By the way, Persian kings ruled by this title, which is either a Shah or, more common, Shahanshah, which means simply King of Kings, which is a common term that a lot of other kings used, like going back to Mesopotamia. And basically, like a King of Kings is kind of like an emperor, more or less. I think in India, they call it a Maharaja. So it's kind of similar to that. That may have been where it came from. Originally, the Maharaja. So yeah, this empire was massive. If you go back to that map I just showed you, you can see, yeah, most of the empire he conquered was probably from Turkey here, Iraq, and then going all the way over here. So a good chunk of it was 80% or more was probably conquered by him originally. They had other rulers besides him. I kind of talk about some other rulers. There's one I'll give you for now that was a pretty famous ruler. After Cyrus the Great died, there was King Darius the First, who was also called the Great. He seized power. I think he was some kind of Persian general. It's kind of a debate about how he's related to. I don't know if he's related or maybe like a distant cousin of his, but he's the one that expanded the empire even further. And so by the time of his reign, the empire's pretty much gotten all control of Turkey. They've taken control of pretty much Egypt and part of Libya, the northern part of Libya. And then they even pushed all the way to the Hindu Kush mountains and, of course, in India. All this territory is pretty much, that's what you're looking at, the whole empire right there under King Darius or Darius the Great's empire. Darius the Great was known for famous things. Like one of the things he did that's well known was he was the one they think that in the early 5th century BC, he built this Persian highway system that they later called the so-called Royal Road, which I think I've got another picture of it I can throw up on the screen for you to look at. But there's a map of it, which is right here. But it ran from basically from what is Susa in southern Iran, where it started. It ran through Iraq and all the way to Sardis, which was a Persian city, which is in western Turkey. The miles on it varies. It says 1,500, but I think the one I looked up said it might be 1,677 miles exactly. So it's considered one of the first major roads built in the world, and was used to move their military around. It was great for their trade. It helped to connect trade with different parts of their empire. It's also used as a postal service believe it or not, to deliver goods, messages to people, the king, or whatever. And Herodotus was one of the first to write about the royal road. He talked about how the messengers and all that were kind of like the U.S. mail, and the fact that they didn't matter if it was snowing or raining, they would try to get their job done. Of course, don't do that much anymore. Or we get a hurricane, they don't want to deliver, I guess. But anyway, so that's something that, of course, they're known for. And so these roads that they were built, of course, by the Persians, was copied by other people. Here's kind of a picture of part of the road at their original capital, Pasargadae, and it's part of the road we're looking at right there. And like the Greeks and the Romans later, built roads, and they're pretty much just copying, the Persians originally. Of course, there's not much left of Persepolis. If you know about it, it was burned to the ground in 330 BC by Alexander the Great. Of course, I'll get to it later, not today, but we'll talk about the fact that later the Persian Empire was conquered by Alexander the Great, who was a Macedonian and Greek conqueror. He put it to the torch, 330 BC. I'll explain later, but it had something to do with the fact that Alexander was kind of mad about the Persians invading Greece, and they had burned Athens, and so he, tit for tat, burned their city down too, also. But he burned a city that was very well advanced and in one of probably one of the largest cities in the world at the time. It was very famous for its some kind of grand staircase that's in front of it. That's well known. All the famous buildings that were with it, and it was all destroyed by him. Oh, one more thing that Darius the Great did that's well known. He developed a system of government where he broke the empire into separate provinces, where each province was ruled by a governor that's called a satrap. A satrap was kind of like a viceroy, which is a governor that basically rules under a king. And the word satrap is a Persian word that means protector. So there were 36 of these throughout the empire. And apparently it was so popular with the Greeks that when Alexander conquered the Persian Empire, he borrowed it and broke his empire up that he conquered into separate, satrap provinces. But his empire later broke up, if you know about that, after Alexander died. One more thing I'll talk about the Persians for now, which is very famous. The Persians were also known for a religion, which is, they were known for a type of monotheism religion, which was called Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism was considered one of the first major monotheistic religions in the world. It's up there with Judaism. Those two are pretty old monotheistic religions. And they think it dates back to, it's kind of a debate about how old it is, but it's about 3,000 to 4,000 years old. Zoroastrianism, which is kind of a Western name they use for it. And it's believed to have been founded by this Persian teacher and prophet who went by the name Zoroaster, who also was called Zarathustra. And it's kind of debated about when he lived. It says 600 BC in that slide, but they think he may have lived as far back as 1000 BC. So he lived sometime before, I think, Darius the Great was king. By the time of his reign, pretty much that had become the main religion of the Persian Empire, which Persia had like millions of people living under him. I forget the number, but it was in the millions. 80 million? I don't know if that's that correct, but it was a lot of people, I know. And he was known for eventually narrowing it down to one main deity, which was the god Ahura Mazda, which was esteemed as the Persian god of wisdom or knowledge, which the name you see there meant wise lord, translated from Persian. And it was seen as some type of creator or creation god that created the world in general. And so they supposedly say that Zoroaster started this religion because he saw some visions when he was collecting water at a well. And he believed that if one followed this god, that what would happen is that your soul would go to like a heaven, It was believed that there was some kind of dualistic aspect to this god. There was like two different versions of it. There was a good part. Ahura Mazda was the good part of it, of the god. If you follow that type of the god and did good things in your life, good deeds, your soul would go to heaven. And I think they had another version, which was an adversary of Ahura Mazda that was called Angra Mainyu, which meant destructive spirit in Persian. If you follow that aspect of Ahura Mazda, your soul would go to like a hell. And so one thing about the Persians, they were one of the first to kind of believe in the idea of that there's demons, there's angels, evil spirits that are out there that can really change your whole, I guess, where your soul goes and all that. So they do believe like this idea of, I guess, heaven and hell, I guess, originally. The idea of Satan, that kind of concept, something that they kind of, I guess, help invent. And so it's very, very influential. That's one thing about Zoroastrianism. It's kind of this religion that later influenced like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Some of the ideas that went into it and all that. So it is a religion that's still around. That's interesting about it. So it's like I said, one of the oldest monotheistic religions that's still around in the world. It's practiced by maybe about 2 million people, mostly in that area, like Iran, Iraq, Syria. You still have people that actually practice it today. But like I said, it's part of what declined was mostly because of the rise of Islam, which helped stamp it out. And I think ISIS was trying to stamp it out too, that terrorist group that came in for a short time in that area, like around Iraq, Syria. Right, let me move on. I'll talk about one more thing, and that's pretty much it today. I want to also talk about the Phoenicians a little bit. So I want to get into them also as well, who that people, who they were overall. So I want to get into that and talk about Phoenicians. Now, the Phoenicians, who were they? The Phoenicians were a type of Semitic people. They're kind of like the Israelites or Hebrews later, which I'll get to probably on Friday. And they mostly were known for developing in what they call ancient Phoenicia, what we call now modern Lebanon. So this is like kind of getting into ancient Lebanese history. I don't know if you ever eaten Lebanese food, but it's pretty good. I like that kind of Mediterranean food. It's located above Israel. That's about where they developed. And they had these different city-states that they developed, which I'll get to later, show you some of the states that they had. But they weren't like one kingdom. It was a collection of city-states that kind of emerged. And they were mostly known for maritime trade. They basically sold goods to people like throughout the Mediterranean Sea. They also, I think in the Sea of Galilee, they may have done some trade. And also in the Atlantic Ocean. They think the Phoenicians may have traded at one point. They are famous for their dye cloth. And so the Greeks later called them the so-called purple people. That's actually what Phoenician means, the purple people. I guess it's because they get this dye on their hands or on their body, and they look kind of purple looking. And so they basically called them that. And the dye they made was either kind of a purplish color or a bluish color. But people called it sometimes the royal purple because a lot of times it was the mark of like nobility or royalty, like in, Israel and other states. And most people didn't know what it was made out of. They figured out later that it was made from sea snails or mollusks that were called murex, which you see there. I think I've got some pictures showing this right here. There's something, the mollusk right there, which is up here. So yeah, the word purple kind of comes from that. Or it was like a purple or deep red color also as well. And you can see it kind of coming out too, right there. So they'd make this, so it had some secretions that would come out of it, and they would make dye out of it, is what they would do. Also, the Phoenicians were great artisans. They worked a lot with wood, like especially cedar and pine. And they were known for being great sailors. They consider the Phoenicians to be the first great, explorers that explored the world and all that. And they built these oared type ships, vessels that were called a bireme, where it had like two decks of oars that would row a ship and all that. And the bireme was the precursor to later ships, like in the Greek world, like the trireme that you may have heard of later. But yeah, they may have explored parts of the Mediterranean Sea, they think, at one point. Even because some theory may have gone up to like close to England, and another theory I've heard is they may have sailed down to the tip of Africa. So I'm not sure about that or not or true, but it's possible that they were great sailors all over the world at one point. One more thing they're known for. Here's, by the way, a picture showing you where their city-states were. Those are some of their famous city-states that they're well known for. I guess the ones I'll put on the screen that are big, they're kind of still around today, is like Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, which are now, they have kind of like modern cities of this that are still there today in modern Lebanon. Like I said, they were city-states. They were kind of separate from each other. But over time, what happened with the Phoenicians, they left. They left Phoenician. Later, that area would be conquered by, I think, by the Assyrians and other groups. And so they left Phoenicia. They wandered across the Atlantic Ocean. Excuse me, not Atlantic, the Mediterranean Ocean. Yeah, maybe Atlantic, but they wandered across the Mediterranean Sea, exploring parts of Africa, parts of like Southern Europe. And you can see here that one of the things that they're known for, the Phoenicians, they founded eventually the city of Carthage, which you've probably heard of, which is in modern Tunisia in North Africa. They found this trading city, as it would be. And over time, what happened was the city of Carthage became eventually a Carthaginian empire, which was a famous Iron Age state, which controlled parts of North Africa from like Morocco to part of Libya. They also controlled parts of the islands close to Italy, like Sicily and Sardinia, and even in Spain. At one point, they may have actually they did later. They controlled part of southern Spain. And the Carthaginians were later a rival state to the Roman Republic, which was developing in Italy, Rome. And later, they get into a big war that was called later the Punic Wars, which you may have heard of, that happened around the 3rd century to about the 2nd century BC. Both fought to control the Western Mediterranean Sea, but they were later wiped out by the Romans. So when I get the Romans, I'll get more into talking about what happened to their culture. There's one more thing that that they're known for, Phoenicians, is their language, which of course is called Phoenician. Phoenician is a Semitic type alphabet, which influenced other alphabets. It was considered, by the way, to be one of the first major phonetic alphabets ever created. There was other alphabets before that, but they were all cumbersome, like cuneiform and hieroglyphs had 1,000-something, syllables or whatever, or symbols. And this one was a very simple alphabet that only used 22 consonants in it. So they mostly developed this language to simplify alphabets, more or less. And over time, this alphabet, which it really had no vowels, which they would add later, heavily influenced other alphabets in the West. So a lot of your Indo-European languages were heavily influenced by it. Greek, Latin, of course, French, German, English. Those are all Indo-European languages that were influenced by it. And then also Aramaic, Hebrew, Arabic were languages that were Semitic languages that were also influenced by it as well. So and they would later add vowels later, over time, and it'll get more complicated. But by and by, the Phoenicians, that was really their biggest legacy, was really language. And it's still where you get the word phonetic from. You talk about phonetic alphabet, that's where it came from. All right, I got a few minutes left. Let me go ahead one more thing, and I'll go ahead and review real quick this section and get it out the way. It says, which empire conquered the Chaldeans? What was this empire's nickname? I think I talked about that a long time ago. But the empire that conquered the Chaldeans was the Persian Empire, which came in, took it over. And the empire's name, of course, was the Greek name. It was called the Achaemenid Empire, which is like here on the bottom. What two main kingdom tribes made up their empire, the Persian Empire? Initially, the empire formed from two states, which was the kingdom of Persia, the Persians, and the kingdom of Media, which is the Medes. And then after that, all these other states were added in later, multiple states. And so the Persian Empire, Achaemenid Empire over time became this multi-ethnic empire, which would take control of parts of the Near East. Who were the many ancient Iranians related to? They were related to the Aryan peoples, Indo-Aryans, that came out of like southern Russia. And in India, in Iran, they're actually called Indo-Iranians, but they're a type of Caucasian peoples that took over Iran and parts of the Near East. Who was Cyrus the Great? Cyrus the Great, also called Cyrus II, was the founder of the Persian Empire. It was called later Achaemenid, and so, by the way, was his dynasty. His dynasty was called Achaemenid, just like the empire. How large was the Persian Empire? It stretched from Iran into Iraq and Turkey. They took over Syria and Israel. They controlled Egypt. They also controlled Afghanistan all the way to India, where the Indus River is. It was a massive empire. It actually at one point controlled part of like 3 continents. Africa, part of Asia, and part of Europe. What famous road did the Persians build in their empire? They built the Royal Road, of course, which was built by King Darius the Great. It connected Iran with Iraq and Turkey. What were satraps? Satraps were viceroys or governors that controlled the Persian Empire, which was founded by King Darius the Great. There were about 36 of them. What was the main religion of the Achaemenid Empire or Persian Empire or later Persian empires? The Zoroastrianism. It was based off of mostly one god, Ahura Mazda, the Persian god of wisdom. Who was the founder of the religion? His name was Zoroaster or Zarathustra, which he was believed to be some type of Persian prophet and teacher who lived like 2,000-3,000 years ago. If you want, I can review real quick. I had a few minutes, but Phoenicians, I told you, were the Semitic people that were from Canaan. They were known for their maritime civilization, trading on the sea, and predominantly they were known for selling purple dye. Their dye cloth, which was made from sea snails, called murex. So that's why they were called purple people, because they would get the dye on them, and of course they were famous for the dye cloth. What famous colony and civilization they found in North Africa? Of course, that's not Persia, but that was, of course, Carthage. Carthage, of course, was eventually a Iron Age state that was founded in where Tunisia is, and it became a rival state to the Roman Empire. And it was founded in the 9th century BC. Roughly. And it was mostly a trading empire that controlled North Africa from Libya all the way to Morocco, but they were also in Spain and part of the islands of Italy. They were later called Carthaginians, of course, and they were originally founded by the Phoenicians. What was the Phoenician alphabet? It was basically a Semitic alphabet that was considered the first major phonetic alphabet in history, and had only 22 letters in it, and it heavily influenced other alphabets over time. So anyway, that's it lecture-wise today. So a little shorter lecture today. So I've kind of, at this point, I've finished Egypt. We've done pretty much the rise of Persia, and I finished the Phoenicians as well. On Friday, I'm going to also talk about, of course, the ancient Hebrews or Israelites. I'll talk about them, talk about the rise of the Israelites And I will start talking about ancient India. So I'm already kind of moving on to some of the other river valley civilizations. So like I said, this is moving pretty quick. So I want to make sure before I go here that later, you start trying to get your assignments, get them done like I've talked about. So right now, I think the prehistory lecture is still up, but mostly right now you want to go ahead and, of course, start working on the Mesopotamia quiz and also that video quiz that I gave you to do on ancient Egypt, the so-called 7 wonders of ancient Egypt. And so that's it for today. Of course, later, like I said, I'm going to have this lecture posted on my YouTube channel. So send me some comments, questions about the lecture. Remember, you do get bonus points, of course, for sending me comments, questions about the lecture. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope y'all are doing okay out there. Hope y'all have a good weekend coming up later. But on Friday, I will have one more lecture, of course, coming up before the weekend, though. Okay, so that's it for today. So y'all take